We are tracking an emergency unfolding in Hawaii at this hour. Thousands have been told to
The one the world has been waiting for is officially here. And yes, we are talking about the times spoken of in the Bible right before the day of the Lord, when God intervenes through disasters, war, and upheaval. These warnings were written long ago. And now, look at what is unfolding across America. In Hawaii, deadly flash floods forced entire communities to leave now, families fleeing in darkness as waters rose without warning. At the same time, the ground is collapsing without cause. The ocean is revealing what was hidden, and the skies are changing in ways no one can explain. Isaiah warned the earth would wither, so is this coincidence or judgment? And now, as war tensions rise, and Trump signals escalation toward Iran, why is everything happening at once? And all of this context is why people reacted so strongly to comments made by President Donald Trump in a recent speech. He said that he is not ruling out sending in more troops to Iran. Before we continue, if you find this topic meaningful, please like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest events. And before we get to Trump's remarkable commentary about sending more Americans to the Middle East, let's look at why the events unfolding right now are so significant and how they may be connected. Across Hawaii, what began as steady rainfall turned into something far more dangerous, as nearly 30 inches of rain fell over Oahu, triggering a rare and extreme flash flood emergency. Sirens sounded before dawn, and over 138,000 people were placed under life-threatening alert, while officials warned that the Wahiawa Dam could fail at any moment, sending a wall of water rushing downstream. Entire communities like Haleiwa and Waialua were told in urgent terms, "Leave now, go to high ground immediately." Roads disappeared beneath rising water, escape routes narrowed, and time itself seemed to collapse into minutes. Families fled with only what they could carry, neighbors shouted warnings through the darkness, and others, unable to escape, climbed to higher floors, waiting and praying as the floodwaters crept closer. Residents near these zones describe a haunting sound, the violent roar of water, a relentless, rising force surging through the land. It echoes like a deep, unstoppable current, as if something has been unleashed beneath the surface. It is the sound of the flood breaking through. When the bedrock of civilization can no longer hold itself together, it serves as the first omen. The world we know is losing its footing. In the heart of America, the state of California, the very ground once seen as a symbol of stability is quietly beginning to fail. Massive sinkholes are appearing across multiple states without a single earthquake, without a storm, without any clear warning to explain their arrival. Roads split open, homes tilt and collapse, and entire sections of land suddenly give way beneath people's feet, as if the surface itself can no longer support what stands above it. These ruptures do not simply damage infrastructure, they erode something deeper, the assumption that the ground beneath us is unshakable. Residents in affected areas describe a disturbing sensation, a deep underground rumbling that moves beneath the surface like something shifting out of place, something long hidden now beginning to move. There are no gradual signs, no visible cracks forming over time, only sudden collapse where stability once existed. Experts point to erosion and underground voids, processes that have always been present beneath the earth. But even they acknowledge the unusual scale, the sudden timing, and the way these events are unfolding across multiple regions at once. But the warnings do not stop there. What has been unfolding on land has not remained contained, and now, even. The oceans have begun to reveal what was once hidden, not gradually. Across coastlines, deep-sea creatures designed for total darkness and crushing pressure are appearing near the surface in a state of unnatural stillness. These are species rarely, if ever, seen by human eyes, now brought into open waters where they do not belong. Witnesses describe an eerie quiet surrounding these encounters, a silence broken only by the slow movement of the tide, as if the ocean itself is holding something back. These creatures do not behave as expected. They drift, they linger, they appear displaced as though forced upward by changes unseen beneath the surface. There is a chilling silence accompanying their arrival, broken only by the low, a guttural wash of the tide. It is the sound of the deep gasping for air, a sign that the very barriers of the natural order are dissolving. In the language of the end times, when the sea gives up its dead, it is the herald of the revelation. Then the warning reaches the silent giants of the land. In California, ancient trees that have stood as silent witnesses for centuries, surviving wildfires, droughts, and the passing of generations, have perished in less than 48 hours. There was no visible disease, no extreme heat, no gradual weakening. They simply stopped living, their strength vanishing, as if something unseen had been lifted away. What once stood firm is now reduced to stillness. In the quiet of these forests, a new and disturbing sound has emerged, the sharp, brittle crack of massive trunks splitting apart, echoing through spaces that once held life. It is not just the fall of trees, it feels like the breaking of something deeper. In Scripture, a healthy tree has always symbolized blessing, endurance, and divine covering. But Matthew 7:19 warns that every tree that does not bear fruit is cut down. And when trees that once thrived suddenly collapse without warning, it carries a weight that goes beyond nature. At the same time, across the world, tensions are rising, wars are escalating, and leaders speak openly of conflict expanding. The stability nations once trusted now feels uncertain, fragile like roots that no longer hold. Because what is happening in the forests is mirroring something happening among people. When even the strongest forms of life begin to wither overnight, it signals more than environmental change. It suggests that protection may be lifting, and something greater is beginning to unfold. Deep beneath the oil-rich soil of Texas, a discovery has surfaced that defies both modern logic and the comfort of time. Workers excavating in areas where the ground had already begun to fail uncovered a massive stone slab engraved with symbols that feel less like history and more like a verdict. The carvings are precise and deliberate, untouched by erosion, untouched by centuries, speaking in a language that does not belong to any known civilization. This was not a discovery made by searching. It was forced into view as the earth above it gave way, as if the land itself could no longer contain what had been buried. These are not crude markings. They carry intention, structure, and authority. Scripture dictates that nothing hidden shall remain so forever. In the divine economy, an artifact resurfaces, not when it is found, sought, but when it is needed. Revelation is governed by timing, not discovery. This stone has emerged at the exact moment when the land is collapsing, the seas are vomiting, they're dead, and the pillars of life are withering. It is the final piece of a terrestrial puzzle. Why now? Why does the earth choose this season of geopolitical fragility to reveal what it once concealed? In it is an invitation to realize that the past is no longer behind us. It has caught up. The stone does not offer instructions. It offers a mirror. It asks us to consider that what this war will end up looking like and how the world will change. There are 3 predictions about this war. The first is, United States will use ground troops. This will mean that Donald Trump will institute a national draft. The second prediction is that Israel and the United States will not use tactical nuclear weapons in this war. Number 3 is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in the Islamic world, will be destroyed during this war. So, the last video explained the other predictions. Today will be the third prediction. Before we start, we need to understand some of the context, some of the players in this war. Before we move forward, it is important to understand the context and the key figures shaping this conflict. This is Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut, one of the 100 members of the United States Senate, and also part of what is known as the Gang of Eight, a small group entrusted with receiving the most sensitive intelligence briefings from the White House during times of war. In situations like this, the administration is required to explain its objectives, its strategy, and the overall direction of the conflict in a confidential setting. After receiving such a briefing, the senator spoke publicly, and what he revealed was not clarity, but concern. He described his reaction as one of deep frustration and even anger stronger than anything he had experienced in his 15 years in office. Instead of leaving with answers, he left with more questions, especially about the true cost of the war and where it is ultimately heading. According to him, several critical issues raised during the session were left unresolved. There was no clear explanation of long-term goals, no detailed outline of how success would be measured, and perhaps most concerning of all, no defined budget. The absence of a financial framework suggests something deeper. This may not be a limited operation, but an open-ended conflict with no clear endpoint. He also emphasized the growing concern over the possibility of American ground troops being deployed to Iran. While no official decision has been announced, the trajectory of events appears to be moving in that direction. The idea that young American men and women could soon be placed into direct conflict was described as deeply troubling, especially given the lack of transparency surrounding the strategy. Adding another layer of tension, there are increasing reports suggesting potential Russian involvement in support of Iran. If confirmed, this would significantly escalate the situation, raising the risk not just regionally, but globally. The presence of another major power changes the nature of the conflict entirely. Taken together, what emerges is not a clear plan, but a volatile and evolving situation. Critical questions remain unanswered, the risks continue to grow, and even those closest to the intelligence are expressing uncertainty. And when those tasked with understanding the war leave with more questions than answers, it suggests that what is unfolding may be far more complex and far less controlled than it appears. How much will this war cost? That question alone reveals something deeper, because if there is no clear answer, then this is not a limited conflict. It is an open-ended war. There is no defined timeline, no clear endpoint, no measurable boundary for commitment, and if the duration is unknown, then the cost, financial, human, and global, remains equally undefined. That is the first critical point. The second is even more serious. Current developments suggest that the United States may be moving toward the deployment of ground troops in Iran, and historically, a move of that scale does not happen without consequence. It raises the possibility of a national draft, a shift from distant conflict to direct involvement, where the burden of war extends beyond strategy and into everyday lives. The third point adds another layer of complexity. There are indications that Russia may already be involved, supporting Iran in ways that could significantly increase the risk for U.S. forces. This is no longer a contained regional conflict. It is beginning to resemble something broader, something that could expand beyond initial expectations. And then comes Iran's response. In a recent interview, Iran's foreign minister addressed the possibility of U.S. ground troop deployment. What stood out was not hesitation but certainty. When asked whether Iran feared an invasion, the answer was immediate. They are not afraid. In fact, they are prepared. According to him, this is not a new scenario. It is something Iran has anticipated for years, even decades. He warned that if U.S. forces enter on the ground, the outcome would be severe, not uncertain severe. He described it as a situation that would lead to major consequences for the United States. And when pressed further, asked again if Iran truly believed it could confront U.S. forces directly, he did not retreat from the statement. He reaffirmed it. This response reveals something important. From Iran's perspective, this is not escalation, it is expectation. A scenario already studied, already prepared for. What is equally striking is the reaction from Western media. The interviewer appeared visibly surprised, even unsettled by the confidence of the answer. It suggests a disconnect, two sides viewing the same potential conflict in completely different ways, one side treating it as a possibility, the other treating it as an inevitability. And that gap in perception is where the real danger begins. At the same time, statements from Donald Trump have added further tension, particularly his criticism of global allies who rely on key regions like the Strait of Hormuz for energy, while contributing little to its protection. He has emphasized what he sees as an imbalance in responsibility, suggesting that if conflict escalates, other nations should bear more of the burden. Taken together, these elements form a picture that is not entirely stable, a war without a clear cost, a path that may lead to ground deployment, a rival power already prepared, and a global system where expectations no longer align. It is no longer just about whether conflict will happen, but how far it has already progressed beneath the surface. Trump's approach to the conflict introduces another layer of uncertainty, one that is less about structure and more about instinct. In multiple public statements, he has openly criticized allied nations that depend heavily on U.S. military protection, particularly those benefiting from strategic regions like the Strait of Hormuz. From his perspective, these countries rely on American power to secure critical energy routes while contributing little in return. This, he argues, creates an imbalance in global responsibility, one where the United States carries the burden while others reap the benefits. This framing shifts the conversation. It is no longer just about a single conflict or a single region. It becomes a broader question of global order: who defends it, who benefits from it, and who ultimately pays the price when stability begins to break down. At the same time, what stands out in his decision-making style is not a clearly defined doctrine, but something more fluid. Trump himself has described his approach in terms of instinct, relying on gut feeling, rather than rigid frameworks or long-term strategic blueprints. In some situations, this kind of flexibility can be seen as strength, allowing for rapid response in unpredictable environments. But in a scenario as complex as this, where multiple nations, alliances, and potential escalations are involved, it introduces a different kind of risk. Because instinct does not always provide consistency, it reacts to the moment rather than projecting years ahead. And that is where the uncertainty begins to grow. There is no fully articulated plan outlining how this conflict would unfold if it escalates further. No detailed roadmap explaining what success looks like or how de-escalation would be achieved. Instead, what exists is a possibility, an open door to action that has not yet been fully defined. This creates a situation where the next move is not entirely predictable, even to those closely observing it. Allies are left to interpret signals rather than follow a coordinated strategy. Opponents are left to anticipate actions that may not follow traditional patterns, and within that space, miscalculation becomes more likely. It also raises a deeper question about how decisions of this scale are guided. When actions are driven by instinct rather than structure, what becomes the anchor? Is it political pressure, personal judgment, shifting circumstances, or something less visible, something shaped by perception, timing, and interpretation of events? Because in moments like this, where the stakes extend beyond borders and into global stability, the absence of a clearly defined structure does not simplify the situation, it amplifies it. What emerges is not a fixed path, but a moving one, where each decision reshapes the next, and where the direction of the conflict may depend not on long-term planning, but on how each moment is read as it unfolds. Beyond strategy, beyond policy, there is a growing sense that what we are witnessing can no longer be fully explained through traditional geopolitical logic. Because when examined through that lens, many of the current movements do not align with what history would define as efficient or rational decision-making. The costs are too high, the risks too unpredictable, and the outcomes too uncertain. And yet, the escalation continues. From a purely strategic standpoint, certain actions appear contradictory. Paths that lead to prolonged conflict are still being considered. Decisions that could trigger wider instability are not being ruled out. It raises a difficult question: if the consequences are so clearly understood, then why does the trajectory remain unchanged? This is where the idea begins to shift. What if these events are not being driven by efficiency or immediate advantage, but by alignment? Not alignment in the sense of alliances alone, but something deeper: timing, positioning, and the convergence of multiple forces moving toward the same moment. In this framework, actions are not always chosen because they are the most logical, but because they fit into a larger pattern that is still unfolding. And within that pattern, movements that appear irrational on the surface may serve a different purpose beneath it. History has shown that major turning points are rarely linear. They are not always guided by clear, calculated steps. Instead, they often emerge from a series of decisions that, when viewed individually, seem disconnected or even contradictory. But when those same decisions are placed side by side, a pattern begins to form, one that could not be fully understood in real time. This is what makes the current moment different. Because multiple layers are moving at once. Natural events, political decisions, military positioning, and public perception are all shifting simultaneously. Each of these can be explained on its own. But together, they begin to suggest something more coordinated, not necessarily by design, but by convergence. And that convergence challenges the assumption that this is simply about winning a conflict in the traditional sense. Winning implies a clear objective, a defined endpoint, and a measurable outcome. But what we are seeing does not fully reflect that structure. There is no single objective that explains every move. No unified strategy that accounts for every decision. Instead, there is movement consistent, accelerating movement without a clearly defined destination. Which leads to a different interpretation. What if this is not about winning at all? What if it is about positioning, about placing pieces into alignment for something that extends beyond the immediate conflict? A scenario where the outcome is not determined by who gains territory or power in the short term, but by how the global landscape is reshaped over time. Because if that is the case, then the events unfolding now are not isolated incidents. They are part of a larger sequence, one that is still revealing itself, step by step, moment by moment. The phrase, "the day of the Lord," is not a single moment, but a pattern that echoes throughout history, a convergence of judgment and renewal, where destruction is not the end, but the necessary passage toward restoration. In Scripture, it is described as a time when God no longer remains distant from human events, but steps directly into history to re-establish order where chaos has taken root. It is both terrifying and purposeful. Because on one side, it carries the weight of judgment. Nations are shaken, systems collapse. What once appeared permanent begins to fracture. Pride is brought low, and everything built on unstable foundations is exposed. The prophets describe it with images of darkness, trembling ard, roaring skies, and fire natural forces responding as if creation itself recognizes the presence of its creator, returning to intervene. But on the other side, it is not only about destruction. It is about renewal, because the day of the Lord is also the moment when what is broken is made right, when injustice is confronted, and a new order begins to take shape. In this sense, judgment is not random, it is corrective. It clears what cannot stand, so that what is meant to remain can finally emerge. Scripture repeatedly shows this dual nature, a tearing down, followed by a rebuilding, a shaking that reveals what cannot be shaken. This is why the concept appears across both past and future. There were moments in history that reflected it in part times, when entire civilizations fell, when sudden events reshaped the world, when people believed they were witnessing the end of everything they knew. And yet, those moments were not the final fulfillment. They were shadows, previews, signals pointing toward something greater still to come. Joel 2:1 captures this tension with striking clarity. The day of the Lord is great and very terrible, who can endure it? It is not described as something comfortable. It is described as something unavoidable. And what makes it even more unsettling is that it does not arrive according to human expectation. It does not follow a clear timeline. It builds quietly, through signs, through patterns, through moments that at first seem unrelated, until suddenly they are not. Because when viewed individually, events can always be explained. But when they begin to converge, when natural disturbances, global tensions, and shifting realities start aligning within the same window, the meaning begins to change. It is no longer just about isolated incidents, it becomes about sequence, about timing. And timing is everything. The day of the Lord, as described in Scripture, is not only a distant future event, it is also something that approaches something that casts shadows ahead of it, signaling its arrival long before it fully unfolds. Which brings us to the question that has echoed across generations and now feels closer than ever before. Is this a warning, or is it the beginning? When the Bible speaks of cataclysm, it does not describe random chaos, it describes reaction, a response, a moment when creation itself begins to shift under the weight of something greater entering into history. Darkness, storms, earthquakes, fire, and clouds are not just natural phenomena in these passages, they are signals, manifestations of a world responding to divine presence. Throughout Scripture, whenever God moves in a decisive way, the environment does not remain still. The sky darkens, the ground trembles, the wind rises, fire descends. These are not isolated images, they are repeated patterns. From Mount Sinai, where thunder and lightning covered the mountain, to prophetic visions in Isaiah, where the Lord is described as coming with fire, earthquake, and great noise, the message is consistent. When God intervenes, creation reacts. Isaiah describes it with unsettling clarity, thunder, earthquake, and flame accompanying the presence of the Lord, not as background events, but as direct expressions of that moment. It is as if the natural world cannot remain neutral. It responds, it reflects, it reveals, and that is where the tension begins. Because in a modern world shaped by science, every event has an explanation. Storms are atmospheric, earthquakes are tectonic, fire follows fuel and heat, clouds gather through pressure and temperature. Each event, on its own, can be understood, measured, predicted to some degree. But the question is no longer just about explanation. It is about timing. Because when these events begin to cluster, when darkness falls in unusual ways, when storms intensify, when the ground shakes in unexpected regions, when fire spreads with unnatural speed, when the sky itself seems to shift, something changes in how people perceive them, not as single events, but as a pattern, a sequence, a convergence. And Scripture has already outlined that convergence, not as coincidence, but as indication. The imagery of cataclysm is not only about destruction, it is also about revelation. It reveals what is unstable. It exposes what has been hidden. It interrupts what has been taken for granted. It forces attention. It forces awareness. Because when everything remains calm, people continue as they always have. But when the environment itself begins to change visibly, audibly, forcefully, it becomes impossible to ignore. This is where everything begins to converge. Natural disasters, rising wars, political instability, and shifting belief systems are no longer unfolding separately, they are aligning, overlapping in ways that feel increasingly difficult to dismiss. Each event on its own can be explained, but together they form a pattern that feels intentional, structured, almost foretold. Matthew 24 reminds us, "These things must come to pass, so stay alert, stay aware, this may not be random." Thank you for watching, and if this message resonates, take a moment to reflect and prepare.